The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." He replied to him, "Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbitrator?" Then he said to the crowd, "Take care to guard against all greed, for though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions." Then he told them a parable. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, "What shall I do, for I do not have space to store my harvest?" And he said, "This is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I shall store all my grain and other goods, and I shall say to myself, 'Now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong?' Thus will it be for all who store up treasure for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Most of us are pretty familiar with the great saints, Mary, Joseph, John Baptist, Peter, Paul, Francis of Assisi, St. Michael, etc. But from time to time, it is good to remind ourselves that there are a lot of saints who lived pretty normal lives. We need to remind ourselves that we can be those saints. The great saints are meant to be admired and looked up to, and sometimes they can even be intimidating by their holiness. We think, well, that will never be me. How in the world could I can never be a saint because I can't be them. But the little saints remind us that we can, that they are the saints that we should be striving to imitate. So I thought we'd take a look at a couple of these little saints that many of you might not have even heard of before. Nicholas Owen. He lived in England during the 1600s when the English crown actively persecuted Catholics. Priests and nuns were arrested. Monasteries and schools were seized by the government. It wasn't unusual for priests to have to go into hiding at a moment's notice to avoid persecution. And that's where Nicholas Owen comes in. Nicholas was a carpenter. He was the son of a carpenter. And he was very good at building what were called priest holes. Priest holes were secret compartments built into large, manor houses where the priests could hide when the authorities came looking for them. If you've ever seen the James Bond movie Skyfall, this is like a thing that happens towards the end of the movie. There's a priest hole involved in the plot. But anyways, St. Nicholas Owen is credited with saving the lives of many priests with his carpentry skills, and now he's known as St. Nicholas the Carpenter. In the 3rd century, St. Florian was sort of a rising figure in the Roman army. He was also known for organizing and managing a unit within the Roman army that acted basically as a fire brigade. And so in a way, St. Florian was one of the first fire chiefs in written history. But Florian also loved Christ, and that love for Christ would lead to his death. Florian lived under the reign of the Roman Emperor Diocletian, and Diocletian ordered one of the worst persecutions against Christians at any point in history. And when Florian refused to prosecute Christians as a result of his position in the army, he was asked to do that. He was arrested and he was questioned about it. And he was given a chance to go free by offering sacrifice to the Roman gods. He refused, and he was, maybe on purpose, burned at the stake for his beliefs. You've all likely heard of Saint Therese of Lisieux. She's actually right there, a statue of her. But did you know that her parents are also saints, Louis and Zélie Martin? Louis was a watchmaker, Zélie was a lace maker, and when the two married, Louis took over the lace making business while Zélie stayed at home as a mom to help raise their 9 children. And the youngest of those 9 children, was Therese. They were a devout family, but that's basically it. They didn't do anything, headline warranting or flashy. They were a simple family, but they are saints. Right before Mass, in the sacristy there's a book, and this book contains all the priests that have ever served for our diocese, and when they die, their name goes into a book, and it has the date, so July 31st. This was Father Emmanuel Berendt. He died in 1979, and this is what has a short biography, and this is what it says about him. I never heard of this priest, didn't know he ever served in our diocese, but Father Emmanuel served for 21 years as a missionary in northern China. While there, he established a seminary in the Shantung province in northeast China. His efforts came to an end when the Japanese invaded the territory. Father Emmanuel was put in a concentration camp and suffered there for 2.5 years. At the end of World War II, Father Emmanuel returned to the United States, motivated by his zealous missionary spirit. Father Emmanuel tried to return to China in 1948, but he was prevented by the communist regime. On September 15th, 1951, Father Emmanuel was sent by his provincial, he was a member of religious order, to St. Patrick's Parish in Lincoln. And with his usual enthusiasm, Father Emmanuel served people at St. Patrick's until June 20th of 1952, when he was transferred to Chicago. He died July 31st in 1979. So this priest that I never heard of, he's probably a saint. Like, he suffered for 2.5 years in the concentration camps in China by the Japanese. So these people, they lived mostly ordinary lives. They did things that you and I do. They had normal jobs: carpenter, soldier, firefighter, small business owner, parents. But they're all saints. And it sort of makes me wonder, how many saints there are out there, really. Like, how many saints do we come into contact with each and every day without really even knowing it? And if these men and women could be saints by doing the most ordinary of things, why does it seem so hard, so impossible, at least for me it does, to think of myself as a potential saint? I remember at the reception after my first Mass as a priest, it's kind of like a wedding reception with some obvious differences, but my oldest brother Tyler, who is 1.5 years younger than I am, he gave sort of a toast, sort of a best man's speech. He wasn't my best man, but kind of served the purpose. And at the end of his speech, he remarked how someday I might be referred to as, he would always think of me as his brother, Kenneth Weirs, but how someday I might be referred to as Bishop Kenneth Weirs or Cardinal Kenneth Weirs or Pope Kenneth Weirs, and thank God that's never going to happen. But at the end of that list, Tyler said, Saint Kenneth Weirs. And, I remember, I think about that speech my brother gave back then a lot. It was 12 years ago, but I still have it. I hold on to it. It's like 6 pages long, but it's got some funny parts. It's got some tear-jerking parts. But anyways, I think about that speech a lot. And I remember saying in my head as he went through those things, saying, yeah, right, after every one of them. Like, yeah, right, Bishop Kenneth Weirs, yeah, right, Pope Kenneth Weirs, Saint Kenneth Weirs, yeah, right. But why? My brother and I, we automatically place those things in that order. Priest, bishop, cardinal, pope, saint. But isn't that out of order? Being a saint shouldn't be the highest possible thing that we could ever imagine of being a Christian. It should be our first goal. We should strive first for sainthood. I think part of the reason for that disconnect, and this is where I'm going to tie it into the gospel, I think part of the reason for that disconnect in our mind is the culture in which we live. We start out, making sure that we have enough for ourselves and the people that are placed, in our care and our responsibility. But we're surrounded by a world of consumerism where you aren't quite living right if you don't have, the newest and the best of everything. You're looked at funny if you have more than 3 kids. A 40-hour work week is for slackers. Your kids aren't good enough if they aren't on 2 or 3 sports teams. Everybody that above the age of reason that can think for themselves, they all ought to have a smartphone. Parents work more and work harder, and yet they have less time with their family. And there's an element of keeping up with the Joneses that America's kind of always been about. But, if my kids are wearing hand-me-downs, that doesn't make you a bad parent. The standard of living keeps going up and up until it consumes all of our time and all of our money. And for what? For stuff. For stuff that doesn't last. For stuff that doesn't make us happy because people make us happy. It's like the parable in today's gospel. We keep building bigger barns and better barns so we can eat, drink, and be merry. But the man in the parable, he's a fool. Because upon his death, all of his material wealth becomes meaningless. Money and security will not get you to heaven. But that's what the world and what the culture pushes on us. No wonder it seems so difficult to be a saint. All of this stuff can distract us and make it seem far-fetched to be a saint. But sainthood should not be at the end of some long list of things that we aspire to be. It should be what we strive to be every day. It should be our entire life. And that's what Jesus is telling us in this parable. The man stores his grain shows how a simple desire for security can turn into some kind of an obsession. He finds himself tearing down his barns just so that he can hoard all of his grain. And that can happen to us pretty easily. We work very hard to support people around us, and then we feel entitled to a few luxuries. And there's no problem with that, but sometimes the luxuries become the norm, and there's a problem with that. We get consumed with them rather than the real reason that we're here. And in a way, we can be actually oppressed by the comforts and the wealth that are around us. So the sin of the man in Jesus' parable wasn't that he had a lot of possessions. In fact, that's not the point of the parable. It's that he didn't do anything with his possessions. He squirreled them away for safekeeping so that he could have more and he could be comfortable. But he didn't recognize that they were gifts from God, and he failed to see that gifts are always meant to be shared. If we look at the 4 saints, possibly 5 saints that I just talked about, each one of them cared for others, especially the poor. And each one of them used the gifts that God had given them for the salvation of those people around them. The lesson that they teach us is that if God has blessed us with material and monetary success, then it's so that we could give it away. I hear from a lot of people who comment about the culture, about the country, about the world, and how it's all going down the tubes, and we all seem to think that we live in difficult times. But none of us are being burned at the stake for believing in Christ, like St. Florian. And I've never had to hide in a priest hole from the government. I've never been held in a concentration camp for teaching Christianity. We can't let the times that we live in be our excuse. We can't let the culture around us discourage us or dissuade us from striving to be saints. Pope Francis famously tweeted, you live in the 21st century and the Pope's tweeting, but he famously wrote on Twitter that to be saints is not a privilege for the few, but a vocation for everyone. To be saints is not a privilege for the few, but a vocation for everyone. We have everything that we need to be saints. God's grace, God's mercy, and God himself in the Eucharist. We don't need to hoard any material things for ourselves. We need to see the temporary material things in life for what they are. They are blessings from God, so they're not bad. The life that God has given us is our pathway to sainthood, and that includes both the spiritual and the material, the eternal and the temporary. Like I said, the sin of the man in Jesus' parable wasn't that he had a lot of possessions, it's that he didn't do anything with them. So don't look at the material aspects of your life as some sort of obstacle, because why else would God create the beauties that we see here on earth, the sunsets and the oceans? Why else would he invent parenthood? Even paying the bills or changing diapers or mowing the lawn can be something holy if we make it holy. They can be the things that get us into heaven. St. Therese of Lisieux, as she was commanded by her Mother Superior to write her autobiography, she said, "I can get to heaven by picking up this pen because even the smallest act, when done out of love, can lead us to God. So today, God is asking us where our treasure is. He wants to see what we've done for his kingdom. And as we heard last week in that gospel where God calls himself Father, when he gives us the prayer of the Our Father, like any good father, even the smallest gifts given to him by his children bring him great joy. So in a few minutes, we will receive the Eucharist. And in the Eucharist, he's offering us the strength that we need for the rest of this week to be saints, to offer all that we have for our brothers and sisters and all that we have for him.